She lost everything in a single moment, her future, her dignity, her place in the world. But out here in the Wild West, survival isn't about what you lose, it's about what you choose next. And sometimes, the greatest victories begin with your lowest point. On this channel, we share stories of cowboys, love, humanity, and the strength of the human spirit. This story teaches us your worth is not defined by rejection, but by how you rise after it. If you're inspired, like, comment, share, and subscribe to support more stories like this.
The shame stung worse than the rejection. Outside, Abigail watched a foreman load her trunk onto a wagon, the man refusing to meet her gaze. The whole town would know she was the educated woman from Boston that nobody wanted. The foreman finally mumbled, "I will take you back to Redemption Springs." Abigail sat stiff as a board on that wagon, refusing to cry. She would not give Silas the satisfaction, but panic was rising in her chest. She had $17, no way back home, and no future in a town that saw her as a failure. She had tried to be a good partner, but Silas made it clear he wanted a woman who knew her place. He did not need a wife who made him feel like a schoolboy in his own home. He needed someone who could cook, clean, and keep her mouth shut. The foreman, Mr. Patterson, cleared his throat. "Some men," he said quietly, "do not know a good thing when they see it." Abigail's throat felt tight. "Thank you," she whispered. He told her the boarding house in town was run by a decent woman, Mrs. Henderson. Abigail knew she could not afford a room for more than a few nights. She had to find work. But what work was there for a woman like her in a cattle town? When they arrived in Redemption Springs, Patterson set her trunk on the sidewalk. She sank onto it, feeling the full weight of her failure. The town was alive with folks living their normal lives while hers had just crumbled. "You plan on living on that trunk, or are you waiting for someone?" A tall man with a weathered face and a kind of rugged look about him was talking to her. "I am considering my very few options," Abigail said, too tired to be polite. The man's lips twitched into a small smile. "Must be some serious considering." He tipped his hat. "Colt Walker." When Abigail introduced herself, he nodded. "You are the lady who came for Silas Boone." Heat rushed to Abigail's face. "News travels fast." "Colt said Patterson told him Silas was a fool. He said you were too educated for his taste." "It seems knowing how to read books makes me unfit for marriage," she said bitterly. "Silas is not the sharpest tool in the shed," Colt replied. "Still no reason to be rude." Abigail stood up, ready for a fight. "If you are here to stare at the rejected bride, you can just move along." "Actually," Colt said, pointing at her luggage, "I came to ask if you need help with that trunk." Despite her anger, a small smile touched Abigail's lips. "I do not have a next move," she confessed. "I have $17 and no prospects." "Then you need a job," Colt stated simply. "Doing what?" "This town does not seem to need a Latin tutor." Colt tilted his head. "Can you teach someone who never really learned how to read and write proper?" For a moment, Abigail thought he was asking for himself, but he shook his head. "Not for me. I had to quit school to work when my pa died." His voice grew serious. "I am tired of feeling slow every time I have to read a contract. I am not stupid. I just never had the chance to learn." Colt looked her straight in the eye. "I know my way around cattle and land, but I struggle to read a book or write a proper letter. So, I want to hire you." He offered her a deal that made her breath catch. He would provide a room and meals at his ranch. He would also pay her $20 a month to be his teacher. That was more money than she could have ever hoped to make. He assured her it would all be proper. His housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, lived in the main house, and his intentions were strictly business. He was a gentleman. "This is just about the learning," he said. Abigail looked at Colt Walker. He had an honest face and hard-working hands. He saw a value in the very education that Silas had scorned. "I would want Sundays off," she said, her voice growing stronger, "and a trip to town once a month." "Agreed," Colt said without hesitation. "And if this does not work out, you give me 2 weeks' notice." He held out his hand. Do we have a deal, Miss Lancaster? Abigail took his calloused hand in hers. We have a deal, Mr. Walker. Colt, he corrected her with a warm grin. And you are Abigail. As Colt lifted her trunk onto his wagon, a feeling of hope began to bloom in Abigail's chest. This was not the life she had planned, but maybe, just maybe, it was the life she was meant to find. It was a far cry from a society wedding, but teaching was noble work. On the wagon, Colt gave her fair notice. Now listen, I'm a stubborn student. I get riled up easy, and I work sun-up to sundown. She met his gaze. And I'm a demanding teacher. I don't abide laziness. He grinned. Well, we'll either get on like a house on fire or kill each other. As the wagon pulled away from Redemption Springs, Abigail's mind spun. Just hours ago, she was a jilted bride. Now she was a teacher for a cowboy. Life sure had a funny way of setting you on a new trail. Can I ask you something? Colt's voice cut the silence. Why leave Boston for a stranger? Her hands clutched her purse. My father, a professor, passed 2 years back. He left nothing but debts. I tried teaching, but the pay for a woman back east is a pittance. So you answered one of those mail-order bride ads, he guessed. Silas's letters were poetic, smart. I thought I'd found an educated man. She gave a short, bitter laugh. Turns out his lawyer wrote them. Silas can hardly string 2 words together. That ain't right, Colt said. It was desperation on both our parts. I needed a home. Abigail looked at him directly. What about you? Why are you not married? Too busy building this ranch. The women here want a man who's already made it, or one who'll live in town. He shrugged. I ain't either of those. I need the open sky and hard work. You do not seem like a man who just needs a cook. I don't. Mrs. Chen sees to that. But a man gets tired of talking only to cattle. He gave her a sideways look. Though after this, I reckon I might learn enough to write a proper letter myself one day. Abigail smiled. I will make sure of it. They rode on as the sun dipped low, trading the town for wide-open prairie. The sheer amount of sky was a beautiful and fearsome thing to a city woman. Ever been on a ranch? Colt asked. Never. Barely been out of Boston before this. It's hard work, he warned. Long days and the weather don't care about your plans. But it's honest. What you put in, you get back. No games, no pretending. That sounds wonderful, she said. It gets lonely, too. Some weeks it's just me and Mrs. Chen. I shared a small room with 2 other women back home. A little quiet sounds like heaven. Colt chuckled. As the ranch appeared on the horizon, it looked solid and cared for. It was not a mansion, but it was home. A proper 2-story house with a big porch, a barn, and pastures full of livestock. It is not much, Colt said, a sudden shyness in his voice. But it is all mine. I built or paid for every piece of it. It is lovely, Colt, Abigail said, and she meant it. A small, older Chinese woman came out from the house. Her eyes were sharp as she looked Abigail over. Mrs. Chen, this here is Miss Lancaster. She's my new teacher. Colt explained. Abigail, this is Mrs. Chen. She runs the whole place. Teacher? Mrs. Chen said, her voice clear despite a thick accent. Good. About time. I tell you 2 years. You need teacher. Colt grinned. And you were right. He turned back to Abigail. She has been on my case about it since she started here. Because you too smart to be ignorant, Mrs. Chen stated plainly. I will do my best, Abigail promised. Then you are welcome. Mrs. Chen showed her to a simple, clean room upstairs. I will bring hot water. Dinner in 1 hour. Alone, Abigail sat on the bed, the day's wild turns washing over her. She had woken up a bride-to-be and was now a teacher on a remote ranch. Colt appeared at the doorway. You settling in? It has been a long day. He sounded concerned. I am fine. just taking it all in. If you want to head back to town, I'll understand. I can take you tomorrow. No, Abigail said, standing up straight. I gave you my word. All right then. But you should know I'm not an easy man to teach. I have a temper when I get stuck on something. And I am busy, he continued. The ranch does not stop for lessons. Some days we will have to skip. We will make it work. An education is not just about a classroom. He watched her for a long moment. You really think you can do it? You run this whole ranch. You handle money. You make deals. You are plenty smart. You just lack the schooling. Abigail looked him square in the eye. The question is not if I can teach you. It is if you are ready to learn. I am ready, he said, his voice firm. When do we begin? Tomorrow, after breakfast. Bring me whatever books or papers you have. I need to see where we are starting from. Fair enough, he nodded. Abigail, thank you for taking a chance on me. At 28, she felt foolish for wanting to learn. He just shook his head. Age has nothing to do with it. Trying to better yourself is about the smartest thing a person can do. After he went out, Abigail put her things away. She hung her dresses in the small wardrobe and set her books on the desk. They were her last ties to her parents, treasures that had survived the hard journey. Just like her. Dinner was a blessing, a simple beef stew with fresh bread and apple pie. Mrs. Chen's kitchen was clean as a whistle and smelled of home. Colt ate like a man who worked hard for his meal, but his manners were proper. Abigail told Mrs. Chen the food was wonderful. The older woman just smiled. You eat too thin. Abigail thought about all the meals she had missed in Boston. Later in the twilight, Colt gave her a tour of the ranch. He showed her the barn, the chicken coop, and the well. He introduced her to his two ranch hands, a pair of brothers named Jack and Tom. This here is Miss Lancaster, Colt told them. She's going to be teaching me to read and write proper. Jack, the older one, just grinned. Well, it's about time, boss. Maybe now you can puzzle out your own supply orders. Abigail looked at him, surprised. You can read? Yes, ma'am, Jack said. Made it to the 6th grade. It is not much, but it is a start. He said it with respect, not to mock his boss. Perhaps you would like to join the lessons, Abigail offered. Jack and Tom looked at each other. We could not pay, Tom said quietly. No charge, Colt cut in. If Miss Lancaster is willing, I will cover it. I am willing, Abigail said right away. An education should be for anyone who wants one. As they walked back to the house, Colt spoke softly. You did not have to do that. I wanted to, she replied. Besides, more students can learn from each other. He chuckled. Just like that, you have gone and started a school. A very small one, she said with a smile. That night, she lay in bed and listened to the sounds of the prairie. The lowing cattle and the shuffling horses were a world away from Boston. Tomorrow, she would not be teaching deportment to fancy girls. She would be teaching grown men the basics they never got. This was not the life she had planned, but for the first time in a long while, she was excited for the morning. She finally had a purpose again. A rooster's crow at 4:30 shattered the quiet. Abigail sat straight up in bed, her heart pounding. For a second, she thought she was back in Boston and late for work. Then she remembered where she was. The ranch. By the time she got downstairs, Mrs. Chen had breakfast ready. Colt was already at the table, finishing his coffee. You are up early, Abigail said, trying to wake up. This is sleeping in for me, he said. Been up since 4, checking on the herd. Mrs. Chen set a plate down for Abigail. Eat up, Colt said. I have about an hour before I'm fixing to mend fence. An hour is not nearly enough time, Abigail replied. It is what I have got, he said, plain and simple. The ranch did not wait for anyone. 20 minutes later, they sat with a children's book and a ledger between them. Read this, she said, pointing to a line. Colt stared at the words, his jaw tight. The boy ran to the store. He squinted. No. Stream. The boy ran to the stream. He read a few more sentences, stumbling badly. Finally, he pushed the book away in frustration. "This is useless. I read like a little kid." "You read like a man who is picking it up again after 18 years, she corrected him gently. "Now write your name for me." He picked up the pencil and slowly wrote out Colt Walker. "Good. Now write a sentence." He thought for a long moment, then carefully wrote, "I own this ranch." The letters were shaky, but the spelling was perfect. He waited for her to judge him, his knuckles white on the pencil. "You have a better foundation than you think," she told him. "Your spelling is good. That tells me you just need practice." "I write like a fool," he muttered. "No," she said. "You write like a man who taught himself with no help at all. That is not foolish. That is grit." She pulled his work ledger closer and looked through the pages. The numbers were neat and organized. He had created his own system for tracking sales and wages. "This is very smart work," she said, tapping the book. "You made a whole accounting system on your own. Do you have any idea how clever that is?" "Any rancher has to watch his money," he said, shrugging it off. "But most hire it out if they cannot do it. You figured it out yourself." She looked him in the eye. "Your mind is already built for learning. We just need to give it the right tools." A little hope started to show on his face. "You really think I can do this?" "I know you can," she said. "The only question is, are you willing to feel clumsy for a few months while you catch up?" "I feel clumsy every single day," he admitted. "Then you have nothing to lose," she said. They decided on a schedule, an hour every morning for basics, and another hour in the evening if he was not too worn out. "That is a lot of time," he said. "Learning takes work," she replied. "If you are not ready to commit, just say so." "I am willing," he said, standing up as Mrs. Chen announced it was 5:30. "I have to go." At the door he turned back. "There is a contract from a cattle buyer. I have been putting off trying to read it for 2 weeks." "Bring it tomorrow," Abigail said. "We will go through it together." After he was gone, Mrs. Chen started clearing the table. "He is nervous," she said quietly. "I saw him last night practicing his name over and over. He is scared to fail. He's good at running this ranch, good with horses. This learning makes him feel small." "Nobody likes to feel small," Abigail said. "But it is the only way to grow." The rest of the morning, Abigail learned about ranch chores. She was clumsy trying to wash clothes on a washboard. Mrs. Chen showed her how to do it right. "Everything takes practice," the older woman said, just like Colt's reading. At noon, Jack and Tom came in from the fields for a meal. Jack looked over at Abigail. "Miss Lancaster, Colt said you might teach us too. We do not want to be a bother." "It is no bother at all," she assured them. "I would be happy to. Can you come to the house after supper?" Tom, the quiet one, spoke up. "I cannot pay you much." "Colt is already taking care of it," she said. "This is for you." The brothers looked at each other, full of hope and surprise. "Why would you do that for us?" Tom asked. "Because an education is for everybody," Abigail said with a kind smile. "Besides, a little friendly competition will do Colt some good." That evening, the three men sat around her kitchen table, ready to start their first lesson. Jack could read fairly well. Tom was ashamed. He wanted to write his own mother back in Missouri, but he could not. He had to pay a stranger to write his letters, telling that man the private words meant only for his ma. Abigail told him that would change. In 1 month, he would write the letters himself. For 2 hours, she taught the three men. Colt and Jack got competitive, a regular ranch hand rivalry. But Tom just worked, slow and steady. When the lesson was over, Colt stayed behind. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. It was a contract he had been carrying for a while. He said, "Let's read it." Under the warm lamplight, Colt tried to read the contract out loud. The legal words were like a foreign language. He stumbled and grew frustrated. "This is impossible," he said, pushing the paper away. Abigail told him it was just lawyer talk meant to be confusing. She showed him the pattern. This part just means you, and that part just means the buyer. They went through it line by line. Abigail put everything into plain English while Colt took notes. His frustration slowly turned into a quiet, simmering anger. "This contract is a cheat," Colt said, his voice flat. It offered $15 a head, but a hidden line dropped the price to $12 if the cattle were underweight. Another part let them charge him whatever they wanted for transport. Colt stared at the paper. How many times had folks cheated him like this? Abigail said, "Now you can catch them. That is what learning does. It gives you the tools to fight back." He looked at her with a new fire in his eyes. "Teach me everything," he said. "I am tired of being the fool who cannot read." They set a routine of lessons. In her free time, Abigail learned the ranch from Mrs. Chen. The older woman taught her how to cook and preserve. "You need balance," she told Abigail. "Brain and hands are both important." Colt was a quick study. Soon he was reading the newspaper and even wrote a letter to a supplier about fence wire. But one evening, he got stuck on a book. "I have read this page 5 times and it makes no sense," he complained. Abigail smiled. She handed him a different book, one by Mark Twain. "Try this one instead," she said. After a few pages, Colt let out a real, honest-to-goodness laugh. "This is funny," he said, surprised. He got lost in the story. The frustrated frown on his face was gone, replaced by pure enjoyment. An hour later, he looked up, amazed. "I just read for fun," he said, like it was a miracle. "It was never fun before, just hard work." Abigail told him, "That is when you truly know how to read, when it becomes a pleasure, not a chore." The next morning, he came to breakfast with dark circles under his eyes. "I stayed up all night reading," he admitted with a grin. Colt said, "I never knew books could be like this." Their lessons changed. He started to question things he read. One morning, he threw down the newspaper. "This is horse manure," he declared. "This writer wants new rules that will hurt small ranchers like me." Abigail had an idea. "Then write a letter to the editor and say so." Colt stared at her. "They would not print something from me," she replied. "Why not? You know more about it than he does. Your voice matters." He realized she was right. For the first time, he felt he could make his voice heard. He wrote the letter that night. Abigail helped him clean it up, but the words were all his. 2 weeks later, his letter was right there in the Redemption Springs Gazette. Colt bought 5 copies, grinning from ear to ear. "Folks are going to read my words," he said over and over, but not everyone was happy. A big rancher named Robert Thornton rode up one afternoon looking for a fight. Mrs. Chen warned Abigail that he and Colt did not get along. Thornton left in a fury. Colt came back inside, his face like a thundercloud. "He tried to buy my water rights," he said. "When I refused, he called me stupid. Then he saw my letter in the paper and got even madder. Said I was getting ideas above my station." "What did you tell him?" Abigail asked. "I told him to get off my land before I helped him." Colt's hands balled into fists. "He said hiring you was a mistake, that educating cowboys just stirs up trouble. He actually said that. For men like him, it does. Learning threatens them. When a man can read his own contracts, he is harder to cheat. Thornton has been trying to buy this place for 3 years. I always said no. Now he says if I am smart enough to write to a newspaper, I am smart enough to see his offer is generous." His voice was pure sarcasm, which means his other offers were a sham. "Do you want to sell?" "Hell no. This ranch is mine. But Thornton is a powerful man. Then you will need to be smarter." That night, Colt pored over every document he owned. Abigail helped him sort through the complicated legal language. "There is a clause here," Colt said, pointing to the deed. "It says I have primary water rights because the spring is on my land. Thornton is downstream, so he cannot legally cut off my water. That is correct, which means his threats about water were a bluff." "That bastard." Colt's smile was cold. "He was counting on me not knowing my own rights. Now you know. And knowing is your best defense." That moment changed things between them. Colt was no longer just a student, he became her partner. Their morning lessons turned into long talks about politics, justice, and how to run the ranch. "You make me think differently," Colt said one evening. "I used to just accept things. Now I question them. That is what education is for. It turns you from a follower into a leader." "Is that what happened with you and Silas? You questioned him too much?" Abigail thought about it. Silas wanted someone who would make him feel smart without actually challenging him. I made him feel small. He could not handle a wife who knew more than he did. His loss. Colt's voice was quiet and sure. Any man who feels threatened by his wife's mind is a fool. Their eyes met, and Abigail felt something shift inside her. This was not the same man she met 3 weeks ago. Or maybe he was, and she was only now seeing him clearly. Colt Walker was always smart. He just needed the tools to show it. "I should go to bed," she said, suddenly nervous. "It is late." "Abigail, wait." He stood as she gathered her books. "I want to thank you, not just for teaching me to read, but for treating me like I was worth teaching. A lot of folks would have laughed at me." "You are not a waste of time, Colt. You are one of the best students I have had. That is because I am desperate to learn. It is because you understand why it matters. You want to change your life." He took a step closer. Abigail's heart started to pound. "You have already changed my life. In 3 weeks you gave me a world I never knew. I can never repay you for that. You are paying me wages. We are even. We are not even close." His voice dropped low. "And I think you know it." Abigail fled to her room, her hands shaking. This was not supposed to be happening. She was his teacher, his employee. This was not supposed to get complicated. But as she laid in bed, she could not deny the truth. In the last 3 weeks, between the reading lessons and the late-night talks, she had started to fall for him, and the look in his eyes told her he felt the same way. The thought terrified her. She was not ready to risk her heart again, not with a man who had power over her future. But her heart had other plans. The morning came too quickly. Abigail got dressed with care, putting on her professional face. She would be a teacher, and nothing more. Last night was a misreading of gratitude, but Colt was already in the kitchen, and he looked like he had not slept either. "We need to talk about last night," he said. "There is nothing to talk about. You were thankful for the lessons. Let us leave it at that. Do not do that. Do not pretend you did not feel what I felt. Colt, I work for you. This is not appropriate. Then quit working for me." He set his coffee cup down hard. "Marry me instead." Abigail felt her knees go weak. "You cannot be serious. I have never been more serious in my life." He walked over to her. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other 3 weeks. But you have changed everything for me. You are confusing gratitude with love. Do not tell me what I am feeling." His voice was firm. "I am not Silas. I am not scared of your intelligence. I admire it. I want to spend my life learning with you. You do not really know me. I know you are brave enough to travel 2,000 miles to marry a stranger. I know you are kind enough to teach cowboys for free. I know you are brilliant enough to make hard ideas seem simple." He stopped for a breath. "I know you are strong enough to get back up after being humiliated. And I know you are honest enough that your eyes tell me how you feel. Colt, I cannot. I came here for security and found a disaster. I am not ready to make that mistake again. I am not asking you to make a mistake. I am asking you to take a chance on us." He reached for her hand. "I cannot promise you a fancy life, but I can promise you a partnership, and a man who will always value your mind. What if 6 months from now you want someone simpler? Then I am not the man I think I am. But Abigail, I have spent 28 years being underestimated because I could not read well. I know how it feels to be dismissed. I would never do that to you." Mrs. Chen cleared her throat from the doorway. "Breakfast is getting cold. You two should eat." They moved apart, but the question hung between them. Colt finally pushed his chair back. "I have to check the north fence line. Take all the time you need, but Abigail, do not say no because you are scared." After he was gone, Mrs. Chen sat with her. "He is a good man. I see the love in his eyes when he looks at you. It is too fast. My husband and I knew each other 3 days before we married." Mrs. Chen smiled softly. "We learned how to love each other. You and Colt. You already have the respect and the connection. You have a head start. What if I say yes, and it is all just another mistake? Was I just trying to prove something to a ghost, or to a man who saw no value in me?" Mrs. Chen gathered the dishes, her voice steady. "Being safe is not the same as being happy, child. You know that." The thought churned in Abigail all day. When Colt came back from his work, caked in dust, he just ate and let her be. He didn't push. Later on the porch, he said a bear likely tore down his fence. "The ranch always comes first." She nodded. "Maybe that is why I am 28 and still alone." He shook his head. "You are alone because you built something that matters. That takes a good long while." "What about you?" "I was lost after my father passed. Silas's letters were a lifeline, promising security. They were a lie, but a lie I desperately needed. I wanted to believe in the safety he offered, but I knew his words were too perfect, too smooth." "You are not desperate now," Colt said softly. "No, I am terrified." She met his gaze. "Desperation is simple. Terror freezes you with all the what-ifs. What is your biggest fear?" "That you will see me like Silas did. Too educated, too opinionated, that I will have to shrink myself to fit into your world." Colt took a long pause. "Silas wanted you smaller. I am asking you to be as big as you are. I want a partner who challenges me, who is smarter than I am. That is not scary, that is exciting. I will say the same thing in 20 years. Abigail, I know who I am, and I know I can handle a brilliant wife, but I cannot handle a lifetime of wondering what could have been." Just then, Jack ran from the barn out of breath. "Boss, we have got trouble. Thornton's boys cut the west fence. Tom caught them, and they put a threat on him." Colt shot to his feet. "Is Tom all right?" "He is fine, but they said they would be back if we fix it. They claim Thornton owns that land now. That is a damned lie. I have the deed right here." He turned to Abigail. "The papers?" "In the wooden box in your study." He grabbed them and returned. "Jack, saddle my horse. Tomorrow I am going to the land office. Tonight we stand guard." Abigail warned him. "Be careful. Thornton is a man with deep pockets." "Let him try," Colt said. "I have the law on my side, and now I can actually read it. That is more than I had 3 weeks ago." He went to set the watch, leaving Abigail with a new kind of fear. Men like Thornton do not back down. The next morning, Colt returned from town with a grim look. His fury was a low burn. "The land office says the boundary is disputed. Thornton filed a claim 2 weeks ago saying the survey was wrong. It is a complete fabrication, but a judge has to see it now. That could take months. Can you afford to fight this? Better now than a month ago. I can read every last word of their legal tricks." He paced the floor. "Thornton is betting I am too broke or too dumb to fight him. He is dead wrong. He is also trying to scare you into selling," Abigail added. "That fence was a message. I do not scare easy. Then he will do something worse. Men like that always do. I have got Tom and Jack. We will hire more help if we need it. This is my land, Abigail. I will not be run off of it." But Abigail lay awake that night, hearing Colt downstairs, knowing this was only the beginning. She figured he was doing the same, mind racing with worries and plans. Downstairs, she found him at the kitchen table with a pile of papers. "You need some rest," she told him. He looked up, tired, clear through. "I can't. I feel like I'm missing something. Some trick Thornton will pull. My reading is better, but it's not enough against his money and lawyers." Abigail sat down. "Then we'll make it enough. Tomorrow we hit the law books hard. You'll know this land's paperwork better than his own men. That's a tall order. You asked me to marry you, that's taller. Here's the deal. I help you fight Thornton. If we win with just your grit and my books, I'll give you my answer on marriage. That's not fair to you. I'm not proving you, Colt. I'm proving us. If we can handle this together, maybe we can handle anything. He studied her face for a moment. And if we lose, I'll still give you an answer. At least we'll know what we're made of first. Deal? He reached out his hand and they shook on it. This time, though, their hands lingered. A warmth spread through her. I should get to bed, she said, her voice a little shaky. Stay. Help me make sense of these water rights. They worked clear through till sunrise. Abigail turned lawyer speak into plain talk, and Colt took notes. When Mrs. Chen came in, they had a plan. Thornton's whole case is built on a survey mistake from 15 years ago, Colt said, eyes bright. But the original government survey was filed proper, with no errors ever reported. That means his claim is built on hot air. It won't stand up in court if you can prove the first survey was right. I need to ride to the Capitol and get the original records myself. That was a 3-day ride each way. I'll be gone a week. Can you manage things here? He looked at her with pure trust. The boys can do the work, but I need someone to make the calls. I don't know the first thing about ranching. You know how to think. That's what matters. He took her hand. I trust you, Abigail. Then I'll do it. We'll handle this together, even apart. Colt rode out the next morning. Abigail watched him go, feeling like she'd sent a soldier into a fight armed only with paper. The first days were quiet. She learned how to doctor a horse and help birth a calf. She even patched a leak in the barn roof. You got more grit than I figured, Miss Lancaster, Tom said. She hammered another nail. I'm learning that myself. On the third day, Robert Thornton rode up with 3 of his men. Abigail met him on the porch, her heart pounding, but her face set. I'm looking for Whitmore, Thornton said, all business. He's away. What kind of business? The kind that's not yours, Abigail said, her voice steady. Any legal talk can wait till he's back. Thornton's eyes narrowed. You're the teacher, the one filling his head with ideas. I'm his teacher, yes. He was fine till you showed up questioning contracts. He knew his place. His place is a landowner with the same rights as you. If that's a problem, maybe you should look at your own dealings. That's mighty bold talk from a woman living on charity, especially one who got run off for being too smart for her own good. The insult stung, but she didn't let it show. I think you and my last suitor share a fear of smarts. One of Thornton's men chuckled, then shut his mouth quick. Where did Whitmore go? Like I said, that's not your concern. And if he went to the Capitol, your friends there can't hide the truth. That's fraud. She walked down the steps, meeting his gaze. I've spent weeks teaching Colt the law. He knows his rights. If you try to cheat him, we'll fight you. Thornton gave a nasty smile. We? He won't marry a woman who makes him look weak. If standing up to a bully is weak, then you've already lost. Now get off this land before I have my men remove you. Thornton stared hard, then turned his horse and rode off. Abigail's legs started to shake only after they were gone. Jack came up beside her. That took nerve, Miss Lancaster. I just stood my ground. To a man like him, that's the same as crossing him. You made a powerful enemy. I made an enemy the day I taught Colt to read. Men like Thornton need folks to stay ignorant. You think Colt can really win? If he can't, then none of us can. Colt came back 5 days later, worn out but smiling. I got it all. The original survey, the grants, everything. There was no error. Thornton's claim is a complete lie. Can you prove it? I sure can. Got certified copies of every last page. His lawyers can't argue with government documents. He grabbed her hands. You were right. Knowing how to read is a shield. Thornton came by while you were gone. Colt's face went hard. What did he want? To scare me. Find out where you went. Abigail squeezed his hands. I told him we would fight him every step of the way. I suppose I made it worse. You made it right. And you said we. His voice got soft. You said we would fight him. I did. Does that mean what I hope it does? Abigail took a long breath. It means I'm done being afraid. It means I want to be your partner, not just your teacher. It means, yes, Colt, I will marry you. He pulled her into a kiss so fierce it swept away all her doubts. When they came up for air, his smile was the brightest she had ever seen. You sure about this? 'Cause I'm never letting you go. I'm sure. She laughed, full of joy. Though we should probably tell Mrs. Chen before she hears it from town. Tell Mrs. Chen what? The woman stood in the doorway, her arms crossed but her eyes full of light. We should get married, Colt said, holding her close. About time, Mrs. Chen declared with a grin. I told Jack and Tom to get ready for a party. I knew it. You two were just too stubborn to see what was plain as day. They wed 2 weeks later at the ranch. In a simple blue dress, Abigail listened as Colt read his vows from a paper he had written himself in the clear hand she had taught him. I promise to value your mind as much as your heart, to be inspired by your smarts, not scared of it, to build a life where we are true equals. I promise to keep learning, to be a man worthy of you. And I will thank God every day that you came here, even though it took a hard road to bring you to me. Through her own tears, Abigail promised to stand with him, to build something together that neither could build alone. When the preacher announced them man and wife, the crowd cheered, but Abigail only saw the cowboy who saw her worth, the man who wanted her to be bigger, not smaller. Later that evening, after the guests had gone, they stood on the porch of the ranch that was now theirs together. Any regrets? Colt asked. Just that I did not find you sooner, she said. He pulled her close. I reckon I needed these years to build a place and become a man who could deserve you. I needed to learn a true partnership is the only real security. They talked late into the night, planning the future they would share. For the first time since her father's passing, she was not afraid of tomorrow. Her excitement lasted 3 days. Then a summons came. Colt was to appear in court over Thornton's claim in just 2 weeks. This is not enough time, Abigail said, her voice tight as she read the paper. Thornton has had months. We have had days. Then we will use every single hour, Colt replied, spreading his maps on the table. You teach me how to argue in a courtroom, how to talk to a judge and not sound like some backwoods rancher. You are not ignorant. His lawyers will try to make me look like a fool. He set his jaw. I have to be better than them. They worked 16-hour days. She coached him on how to present facts, how to stay calm when provoked. Thornton's man will try to get a rise out of you, she warned. He will call you a liar. He will question your intelligence. Do not take the bait. What if I just want to punch him? You smile, and then you bury him with the facts. Violence is for men who know they have already lost. The night before court, Abigail found him on the porch, staring into the dark. On the porch that night, he stared into the dark. What if I mess this up in court? What if I sound like the fool Thornton says I am? You will not, she said, taking his hand. You know every detail of this case. You are prepared. And if you stumble, you remember why you are there. For our home, for our future. Our children, he said softly. You think about that? Every single day, she whispered. He pulled her close. That is why I cannot lose. The courtroom was full of townsfolk, all eager to see the rancher face off against Robert Thornton's fancy lawyers. Abigail watched Colt take his seat alone, while Thornton sat with 2 men in expensive city suits. The judge called the court to order, and Thornton's lawyer, a slick man named Peaton, rose to speak. Your Honor, this is a simple matter. Ever felt the deck was stacked against you? That was Colt Walker. A slick lawyer named Peaton was trying to steal his land, claiming the old survey was flat out wrong. This story is about how simple truth beats fancy tricks. The judge asked, Mr. Walker, where is your lawyer? Colt stood up, calm as you please. Representing myself, Your Honor. Nobody knows my land better. The lawyer smirked, but Colt laid out his proof. The original survey, he said, was done in 1873 by Thomas Eldridge, a man who surveyed over 200 properties and never made a mistake. That is ancient history, Patton argued, but Judge Harrison cut him short. Let him finish. Colt held up certified copies. The territorial records show no error in the original survey. I went to the Capitol and checked them myself. He then explained that the true boundary was a spring on his property, a landmark that had not shifted in 15 years. Mr. Patton's expert wants to move the line 300 yards east into an empty pasture. That is not science, Your Honor. That is fraud. Patton shot to his feet in protest. I am qualified to read territorial law, Colt countered, holding up another document. The law says to use natural landmarks, just like the original survey did. Your expert's work violates that standard. The judge read the paper while Patton's confident smile faded. Colt then presented sworn statements from 3 neighbors confirming the spring was the boundary. Finally, he revealed his trump card. Mr. Thornton himself acknowledged this boundary in a signed letter from 2 years ago. The context is clear, Colt said plainly. He disputed the line only after I refused his insulting offer for my land. He thought I was just some ignorant rancher he could push over, Colt declared to the silent courtroom. And he has a history of doing this to other small landowners. Colt's voice was steady and strong. I am not selling, and I will not be bullied. The law is on my side. Judge Harrison studied all the documents, then turned to the flustered lawyer. Mr. Patton, do you have a response? Patton could only shuffle his papers. The court finds your survey is contradicted by 15 years of records and Mr. Thornton's own words, the judge said coldly. What is truly irregular here is a wealthy man using this court to intimidate his neighbor. I am ruling that the original survey is valid. The land belongs to Mr. Walker, the judge announced. Mr. Thornton will pay all court costs and cease all harassment. The gavel fell with a sharp crack. Colt stood for a moment, then crossed the room to pull a crying Abigail into his arms. We won, he whispered. Outside, a furious Thornton confronted them. This is not over. Colt met his gaze without fear. It is. If you come near my family again, I will take all this evidence to the territorial attorney. Thornton sputtered. I am not ignorant anymore, Colt said quietly, taking Abigail's hand. Let us go home. The town celebrated their victory, but the real joy came a week later when Abigail suspected she might be pregnant. The doctor confirmed it 2 months later. Colt immediately started building a nursery by hand. This child will have all the opportunities I never did, he vowed. They will know how to read and write from the start, but also how to work hard. Abigail touched his arm, smiling. They are getting the best of both of us. The pregnancy was not easy, however. Abigail was ill for months, unable to keep much down. Colt hovered over her with worry, but Abigail refused to stop teaching her ranch hands. You are everything to me, he told her, his fear plain to see. That makes you fragile in my eyes. Their son arrived in March after a long and difficult labor that left them both shaken. But seeing the baby in Abigail's arms made everything worthwhile. Daniel, she whispered, naming him after her father. He is perfect, Colt said, his voice breaking. They raised him as a partnership. Abigail taught him letters while Colt taught him the land and honest work. By age 5, Daniel was already explaining feed cost calculations to the ranch hands. He will be balanced, Abigail said with pride. Smart and capable. 2 years later, their daughter Rose was born. She had her father's iron will and her mother's sharp intellect. She is 3, Colt said one night, half in awe, and she is already correcting my math. He paused. And her method is faster. Abigail laughed until she cried. As the children grew, Abigail's small lessons expanded into a town school, offering an education to any child or adult who wished to learn. Colt watched his wife, Abigail, working by candlelight again. You are going to run yourself into the ground, darling, he said. She was teaching half the territory to read for free. So many folks cannot even sign their own name, she replied. You need help, he insisted. A real school with books and other teachers. Abigail shook her head. The town council will laugh at a school run by a woman. Colt's jaw set. Then let them. After that courthouse fight, I have gotten good at arguing. Let me handle the council. The council meeting was a hornet's nest. Men argued that free education was a foolish idea and a woman should not run a school. Colt stood up. My wife is offering our children a future. She is smarter than any lawyer and more qualified to teach than anyone in this room. He looked them dead in the eye. If you are too small-minded to accept this gift, we will build the school ourselves. That did the trick. The school was approved. Soon, the Redemption Springs Community School opened its doors to students of all ages. Years passed. Their son, Daniel, was a natural scholar, while little Rose ran an animal hospital in the barn. Our daughter collects critters, Colt teased one evening. She gets that heart from you, Abigail smiled. You hired me, remember? I was the stray. He pulled her close. You were never a stray, Abigail. You were just waiting for your victory. We won, she corrected softly. The ranch, the school, our children. We built it all together. Do you ever have second thoughts? Colt's question caught her by surprise one evening. About marrying me instead of a more polished man. Every blessed day, Abigail said, watching his face sink before she went on. I regret that I wasted so much time being afraid. I regret that I nearly said no because my heart was still bruised. I regret every moment I doubted that we could build this life together. But you do not regret me. Colt Walker, you were the best decision I ever made. Everyone said I was too educated and too opinionated, but you told me to be more. You have championed every one of my dreams and raised our children to be both smart and good. The only thing I truly regret is how much Silas's rejection stung. I should have been sending him a thank you note. His foolishness led me straight to you. For their 25th anniversary, the ranch was filled with people whose lives they had touched. Jack and Tom, now running their own successful spreads, offered a toast. 25 years ago, Colt hired Miss Lancaster to teach him how to read, Jack said. We did not know we were watching the start of something that would change this whole community. They proved that hard work and book smarts can go hand in hand, Tom added. And they showed us that being turned down by a fool can be the best luck you will ever have, because it makes room for your true partner. Daniel, now 18 and heading off to university for veterinary medicine, spoke next. My parents taught me that being smart is not about being better than others. It is about being better than you were yesterday. They showed me that a sharp mind without a good heart is worthless. Rose, accepted into the mathematics program at just 16, was the last to speak. Mama was told she was too smart to be a good wife. Papa was told he was too uneducated to be a good rancher. Together, they proved that a strong mind and a strong will can beat any challenge society throws at you. They built more than a ranch. They built a legacy. Later that night on their porch, Colt said softly, "We did all right for ourselves." "We did more than all right," Abigail corrected. "We built something that will last. Think we can manage another 25 years? I think we can manage forever. You are still teaching me about grit, and I'm still teaching you about books. That is because you married a stubborn cowboy who never wants to stop learning. And you married a headstrong woman who refuses to be silenced. Best decision we ever made." They sat watching the stars, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new chances to prove that their partnership could handle anything. A partnership built on respect and true love was a powerful thing. The ranch was prosperous. The school was full of purpose. Their children were ready to find their place in the world. Abigail had been rejected for being too bright, and Colt had been dismissed for being uneducated. Together they built a life that proved intelligence and integrity were an unstoppable combination. That legacy would stand long after they were gone. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday, 28 years into their marriage. Daniel, now a 26-year-old veterinarian in Denver, was coming home with urgent news. Abigail's hands trembled as she read it. "He does not say what is wrong," she told Colt, her voice tight. "Just that he needs to see us right away. Then we will wait for him." and we will not fear the worst. But Colt's jaw was set with worry as he held her close. Daniel showed up 2 days later, and he had Rose with him. The grim faces on her children told Abigail trouble was brewing. "Just say it," she urged, her stomach in knots. Daniel didn't waste words. "The government is fixin' to shut down the school." He explained a new rule. All teachers needed recent certification. "Your papers from Boston are too old, Mama." Abigail felt the ground give way. "That's hogwash. I've taught here for 28 years and trained good teachers," Rose cut in, her voice sharp. "This isn't about teaching. It's politics." A new commissioner, Howard Fleming, was behind it. He was tied to Robert Thornton. That name landed like a punch. Thornton, that old buzzard, was still trying to ruin them. "He wants to tear down everything you built," Daniel said. "And Fleming is his own nephew." The new rule was a weapon aimed right at free community schools. They wanted to make everyone pay for learning. "We have to fight this," Abigail declared. But Rose had the paperwork. "It's all legal. You have 60 days to get a new certificate, or they'll close us down for good." 60 days was impossible, and they all knew it. "That's the whole point," Daniel said. "Fleming is betting you'll just quit." Colt's fist hit the table. "Then he doesn't know our mother." Abigail spent a week hitting brick walls. Every official in every university said the same thing. Certification took months with no exceptions for her long years of experience. One of her teachers offered to get certified to keep the doors open. "But your own classroom would go dark," Abigail replied. "We can't rob Peter to pay Paul," Abigail sighed. "So what's the plan?" "We don't give up," she said, her voice firm. Help arrived on horseback. Jack, now a rancher and a man of influence in the legislature, spread papers on her kitchen table. "I found a loophole," he announced with a grin. "Fleming's law requires certification from an approved institution. Well, your school got its own territorial approval 15 years back. That means you are an approved institution. You can certify your own teachers, Abigail." "That can't be right," she whispered. "It is if we move now. I'm pushing a bill through to make it official. I have the votes. Fleming will surely raise a fuss." Colt warned. "Let him," Jack said. Rose's eyes lit up with a familiar fire. "We'll use his own rules against him." The fight was fierce. Fleming went on the attack, calling Abigail a radical who was ruining education by offering it for free. He painted a picture of a school where good children had to sit beside former drunks and criminals. "Mrs. Whitmore's methods are a danger," Fleming declared at a public hearing. "She believes learning is for everyone, not just those who can pay. This cheapens the very idea of education." Abigail rose to speak, her voice steady and clear. "Mr. Fleming thinks education is a prize for the rich. I believe it is a right for every single person. He thinks some folks are beyond saving. I believe everyone deserves a chance to better themselves. He wants to use schooling to divide people," she continued. "I use it to build a community." "You aren't even properly certified," Fleming shouted. "I have a certificate from one of the best academies in America," Abigail retorted. "But my real proof is the 40 teachers I've trained. My proof is this school's 28 years of success." She held up a folder. "These are letters from my students. A ranch hand who now owns his business. A young woman who couldn't read and now teaches others. These are the fruits of my dangerous education." The room burst into applause. Fleming's face turned beet red. Jack's bill passed. The governor, weary of Thornton's games, signed it into law right away. That night, Colt held her close. "We won, Mama. We always find a way. Still, I am worn out, Colt," Abigail admitted, the 53 years showing on her face. "How many more fights can we take on?" He smiled. "As many as it takes. What we are doing now is bigger than us." Their work meant that a sharp mind was a gift, not a threat. That belief bore fruit. 5 years later, Rose, now 31, came home from a big university with incredible news. "They have offered me the Dean of Mathematics position," she said, her voice full of emotion. "But there is a catch. What kind of catch? Abigail asked, her heart about to burst with pride. They want you to give the graduation speech, to honor the teacher who made it all possible. I am their proof, Rose had said. A girl from a community school now running a university department. Abigail stood before 2,000 people, ready to tell the truth of her 33 years with Colt. I was once told I was too educated for a husband, she began. That rejection felt like the end of everything. But it was the start of my real life. It led me to a man who saw my mind as a blessing, not a burden. We built a life that should not have worked. A book-smart woman from Boston and a cowboy who could barely read. We proved that education makes people capable, and we showed that a true partnership is built on respect, not rules. The applause went on for 5 minutes straight. People shared stories of how her school had opened doors for their children, of how her courage had inspired them. You changed the whole territory, Mama, Daniel told her, holding her tight. Their 50th anniversary arrived on a beautiful fall day. The ranch was 3 times its old size, and the school was now a network of 15. Their children were thriving, but the best part of the day was sitting on the porch with Colt, watching the sun go down. 50 years, Colt said, his voice deep and steady. I still remember you sitting on that trunk, looking like you were fresh out of options. That feels like another life, she said. I am not that same woman. No, he agreed. You are more yourself than you ever could have been with him. He took her hand, his grip still sure. You know what I'm proudest of? We never stopped teaching each other. Just then, a wagon pulled up. It was old Tom, still spry at 72. Sorry to bother you all on your anniversary, he said. This came by special delivery. He handed Abigail a thick envelope. She opened it, and her laughter turned into tears of joy. Colt read the letter twice. What is it? Tom asked. The government is creating the Abigail Walker Award for Excellence in Education, Colt said, his voice cracking. And they are naming the first teacher training institute after her, Colt added. After us, Abigail corrected, showing him the paper. The Whitmore Institute. They said our partnership is the model. Tom just whistled. Well now, that is a legacy. After he left, they sat in the quiet, feeling the weight of it all. Do you ever think about what would have happened? Colt asked softly. If Silas had said yes? Sometimes, she confessed. And I know I would have spent my life shrinking to fit his world. I would have survived, but I never would have truly lived. His rejection was the best thing that ever happened to me. It made me wait for a man who saw my fire as a treasure. I just saw a woman who could teach me to read, he chuckled. I ended up with a partner who taught me how to live. And I saw a man who needed some book smarts, she replied. I got a partner who taught me kindness matters more than being right. They sat holding hands, just as they had for 50 years, watching the stars appear. The ranch was peaceful below, and the school lights glowed in town. Abigail had been rejected for being too smart. Colt had been dismissed for not being smart enough. Together they built a life that proved you need both brains and grit, both knowledge and heart. They showed that a true partnership is built on respect and letting each other shine. Their legacy was not just success, it was transformation. When two people refuse to be held back by what others think, they can change the world. By choosing partnership over power and love over fear, their story became one that would never end. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.